we're one of the first cities that passed a climate action plan, a pretty strong one that has become the kind of the bar, I feel like. So Emily, why don't you take it away?
You can't hear me. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Diana. So the City of St. Louis Park adopted our climate action plan back in February of 2018. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of context around that before I get into the implementation, because I think it's going to be kind of important to understand what our goals are before I talk about how we're going to implement them. So the Climate Action Plan was developed and adopted just over 2 years ago at the urging of a lot of our local high schoolers, which Abby mentioned earlier, as well as our Environment and Sustainability Commission, and hopefully a few of those members are on this call this morning. The plan calls for carbon neutrality community-wide by 2040. So what's in it? And I'm just going to speed through this. So it's a 22-year plan, now down to about 20 years, of course. It begins with 3 different Kickstart projects, 7 midterm goals, and then a bunch of advanced strategies. So the 3 Kickstart projects that led off the plan, first was a youth-led outreach project to a lot of our commercial and industrial businesses. We also built a climate action resource hub, which I'll show a screenshot of a little bit later on. And then an effort to expand public electric vehicle chargers citywide. Our plan calls for 7 different midterm goals to be reached by 2030. And the initial focus of our implementation is on those first 5 goals, because obviously that makes up almost about half of the emissions reductions that we're going to be able to reach by 2030 if we can hit all those first 5 goals. So that's mostly what I'll be talking about today. The advanced strategies are things that we're planning on looking at after 2030. So those are things like looking at thermal energy grids, fuel switching, potentially carbon offsets, and different emerging technologies, things like that. And combined, the goal is for all of these things to get us to carbon neutrality again by 2040. So now diving right into the implementation. I'm going to divide our implementation plan into these 3 different buckets, just for simplicity's sake. We'll talk about internal projects, resources and events, and then our policy. So first, here's a quick screen grab of our implementation tracking tool. We use this to track our progress against all the initiatives that we've listed in our climate action plan. I think it's pretty fun to look at with all the rainbow of colors, and it kind of makes our spreadsheet a little bit less daunting. Getting to our first internal project. And I'll just stop and mention that the first 2 years of this plan really focused primarily on internal projects. I'm really grateful to my predecessor, Shannon Pence, who really spearheaded a lot of these efforts and got us off to a great start on the plan. Beth, I just saw your question about what platform we're using for a tracking tool. This was developed by a consultant in 2019 before I came on board, and it's really just a enormous spreadsheet, Excel workbook. And we're just beginning to learn the nuances of it, but I mean, I'm joking about how colorful and fun it is, but when I learn it better, Chris or Beth, I'm happy to connect with you about that. So our first internal project was reaching 100% renewable energy operations. So for city operations, we are now 100% renewable. We have solar panels on 2 of our facilities, and we're about to be cutting the ribbon on our new nature center, which will also be not only powered with solar, but also 100%, or it's designed to be carbon neutral. So it has no, it's got heated by geothermal, it's got solar, it's got a lot of amazing features. So that hopefully if the timeline progresses as it's supposed to, the ribbon will be cut on that in mid-June. We also looked a lot at our electric vehicle fleet and what we could do to expand the use of public chargers. So we used funds from Xcel Energy to provide a fleet assessment using Fleet Karma. So that looked at which fleet vehicles we could replace potentially with electric, and we did go ahead and replace 2 of our vehicles. We also got a grant from the MPCA to replace a lot of our power tools, our gas-powered and diesel-powered power tools with electric tools. And we installed EV chargers in 2 of our public parking lots with plans for additional chargers at the Nature Center next month. Moving on to resources and events. So as I mentioned, one of those 3 Kickstart projects was this resource hub, which we've called the Take Action site of our website. It includes a lot of actions that residents, businesses, and nonprofit organizations can take, as well as the solar suitability assessment tool that Abby mentioned earlier that Great Plains Institute helpfully put together. We also host quite a few events. This is something that our Environment and Sustainability Commission has really been great at doing, helping to be ambassadors for sustainability and for our climate action plan in the community. So our Roots and Shoots is our high school club within St. Louis Park High School. They've done a lot of events around electric vehicles and solar, as well as our Environment and Sustainability Commission. They held a ride and drive last year, and they've been great for getting people out to our programs like Solar Twin Cities, solar group purchasing programs, and other events. About a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, City Council authorized additional resources to ramp up our external initiatives because we'd focused a lot on internal initiatives and they really wanted to expand the scope of the Climate Action Plan to start looking more outward. So a new division was created, the Sustainability Division, with 3 new positions. So that's the Sustainability Manager and 2 Sustainability Specialists. My predecessor resigned in July, and then all of the responsibilities were moved over to our Building and Energy Department because that really controls so much of what we do around the built environment. And our focus is really just to implement the Climate Action Plan. So around that time, we started to pass a bunch of ordinances. One of the first was the Efficient Building Benchmarking Ordinance. And I know that we've talked a lot about benchmarking with a lot of our cities in the metro area. But really, this is an effort to increase energy efficiency in large commercial and multifamily buildings as soon as possible, because you, of course, can't manage what you can't measure or what you don't measure. And so we're trying to encourage all these commercial industrial property owners and multifamily property owners to better understand their energy use through benchmarking that's due by June of every year. We also have an electric vehicle service equipment ordinance that was passed early last year. This was spearheaded by our community development department that requires a number of electric vehicle parking stalls depending on the new development that's going into the city. It also requires about 10% of the spaces that have to have electrical capacity, so conduit, to support future electric vehicles. Finally, the program that I've been working on this year with staff is the Climate Champions program. So the goal of that it's an incentive-based program to increase energy efficiency and renewables across all different property types. And the idea is to package no or low-cost energy assessments and existing loan and rebate programs, plus a few new ones, into one new offering and publicize it really well to increase adoption. And further, we would recognize anyone who completed that assessment and take any one action as what we're calling a climate champion. I'm not gonna, excuse me, I'm not gonna read through this whole table, but this is kind of a snapshot of what we're looking at with incentive-based programs. And I really want to point out the column on the right, how we're really trying to look at everything around here with an equity lens as much as we can. So for instance, for homeowners that complete a home energy squad visit, we're going to look into doing larger city rebates for those homes that are in MPCA identified environmental justice areas of concern. So we want to be sure to look at equity throughout all of our incentive-based programs. So what are some of the challenges, aside from the pandemic completely derailing the rollout of this program, which was intended to go out this month? We have a small budget. So are the incentive amounts that we're going to be offering enough to spur action, especially when we're talking about really large commercial and industrial buildings? And installation of solar, which is still, obviously has come down a lot in price, but is still out of reach of many property owners. we are struggling with how we're going to be able to track results. We haven't even begun yet, but we understand that utility data privacy regs mean that we can't really get granular data around the results of these programs. So tracking how well people are taking advantage of these things is going to be something we'll have to figure out. And finally, equity. So whenever, as I mentioned, doing an incentive-based program, how do we distribute the funds equitably when our biggest carbon emitters may be our wealthiest property owners? So it's something we have to constantly be thinking about. And then in terms of next steps, we'll quickly wrap this up. So right now we're in the middle of the benchmarking ordinance implementation, because of course that's due June 1st. This Climate Champions program, we had intended to start with rolling it out to commercial and industrial property owners, followed by 1 to 4 unit residential properties. That timeline is a little bit in flux right now, just because of what's going on around the world. We're going to continue to lobby for an advanced building energy code, also called a stretch code, that I know that we've talked about quite a bit with this group, but I'm happy to talk about that more offline. And then transportation challenges. We have 2 new Southwest LRT stations going into St. Louis Park specifically. So how can we design transit-oriented development to really limit the use of single occupancy vehicles? And what else can we do around transportation, not just to electrify cars, but to get people out of their cars? How can we get them onto the buses? How can we get them to use, obviously, the bike trails and sidewalks to do more than just recreate? So, so that's some of our challenges. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Okay. So time for questions and answers. We had planned to wrap up at 11:30. I think that, you know, for those that you're able to stay, we'll go a few minutes longer, being that we got off to a little bit of a late start. So let's, so let me just start off the questions with, and this is probably mostly for Abby, you know, so for those cities that are interested in looking at a climate action plan or something along the lines of a climate action plan, they're going to need help. Where do they go look for help, either for getting advice about what they need or for actually creating the plan itself?
I mean, I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them. The GreenStep Cities program is also a really great resource. So Philip Music, I think, is on this as well. If you're in the metro area, there's Met Council staff. And actually, the Met Council was supposed to have a meeting next week that got canceled, where they were going to share a lot of the resources that they've been developing over the last year. So they are working on developing data sets for every single community within the metro area, as well as some templates and fact sheets for what cities can do. But yeah, all of those resources are great, and I'm always happy to respond to any questions as well.
Okay, let's see.
Oh, and the other thing, actually, where I would say is, you know, go to the cities that have done it as well. You know, Emily is a great resource. Melissa is a great resource. Beth Calistad is on this call as well. Go to those communities and really, you know, talk to your peers and get a sense of what they've done and how it's gone for them. I would say that's probably the best place to go.
Okay. Got a question here. Our county is writing a new comprehensive plan. Some commissioners would like to add sustainability section to this plan. We live in an outstate, mostly rural county. I do not think many rural counties have climate action plans. I hear that Winona County does. Does anyone know about other counties who have sustainability or climate action plans?
I think that there are a couple of folks who answered that question within the chat box, but Washington County does have an energy action plan. Hennepin County is currently working on developing a plan as well. I know that Ramsey County has some on resilience. For rural counties, I'm not aware. Maybe there's somebody on here who knows of a rural county that's been working on that.
Okay. Let's see here. So that, we talk about climate action plans and, kind of, not quite full-blown climate action plans, but generally speaking, how long does it take to write a plan from scratch, and assuming that time frame should probably include client engagement?
So I think that there's some variation in that. Most plans are likely going to take at least a year, in some cases longer. Some of the considerations are, what does your community engagement look like? What is that process? That can make it longer. I think other things that tend to lengthen that timeline are elections. So maybe you have an administrative change like what happened in St. Paul. So their climate action plan was developed over 2 different administrations and took, about 2 years or so to fully complete. The other thing is just getting on city council agendas. For St. Louis Park, it was delayed for a few months because there was a snowstorm on the day it was supposed to be adopted, and it was, I think, the first time they ever canceled a city council meeting. So those kinds of things can factor in just the timeline of getting things. But generally, getting the data, community engagement, those can take much longer. And with the work plans, we really want to cut that down to be much more focused and compact timeline. So we're aiming for under 6 months for those.
Okay. And Melissa and Emily, for your 2 plans, do you know how long it took to create those plans?
I believe St. Louis Park's plan took about, I want to say about 16 to 18 months. Abby, you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that was about the timeline.
St. Louis Parks?
Yes.
So, it was about a year, yeah, from the very beginning to the adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies. I must have been looking at the timeline from when the resolution was adopted to when the actual action plan was adopted. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Which was obviously a bit longer.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
And for the city of Red Wing, we haven't actually started working on the actual plan yet, but I believe it's supposed to take 3 to 4 months. Is that correct, Abby?
Yeah, so yes. And for example, it's a little slowed down because of the pandemic, right? And so,
yes.
We were supposed to have had our first in-person meeting, but that didn't happen. So, so there's always, things that can pop up that you're not aware of.
All right, so another question here. From Jason, we have a new housing development going forward in our city. The housing development plans have a diverse housing mix. How can we ensure that these new housing developments are low or net zero emissions if current city laws / zoning don't have the tools to do that? That might be a tough question.
Emily, do you want to talk about St. Louis Parks?
Yeah, sure. So St. Louis Park has a green building policy that kicks in anytime the city is has invested $200,000 or more in a project. So if you're talking about a project that uses TIF money, it typically is going to use at least that much. And so that policy will kick in. And I've found that right now the majority of our projects seem to be using some kind of TIF dollars to get done. So the green building policy is affecting many more properties than I had anticipated when I first started with the city. So that's been really exciting to see, especially since, as you mentioned, we are, kind of hamstrung when it comes to what we can legally require cities to do in terms of, or require developers to do above and beyond the energy and building code.
Mm-hmm.
And we do also meet with them and remind them of all the Excel design assistance and rebate programs that are available so that hopefully they can even if there's not TIF dollars invested, that we can start them off on the right foot with their designs.
Mhm. And Emily mentioned before that she's part of a group who are pushing for some changes at the legislative level to enable cities to have more advanced energy requirements for commercial buildings.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. We're not sure that that's going to move forward this legislative year, but there's always next year.
Seems unlikely. Yeah.
Yep, sure does.
Mhm.
And then perhaps our, excuse me, final question, excuse me. What is a resilience plan? How is that different than a climate action plan or not?
Melissa, I thought you wrote a really nice description of it. So how about you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, I can't remember what I wrote. Oh, let's see if I can find it.
At about 11:24.
There we go. Yes, so a resiliency plan assesses the areas of a city that are most vulnerable to climate change impacts and then recommends strategies to adapt to these impacts and reduce potential vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm. And that can include, the built environment, natural infrastructure, and also your vulnerable populations within your community as well.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Abby.
Just checking, see what other questions may have turned up while we were talking here. Looks like there's a lot of information here. So, okay, so it looks like that's, I think we covered all the questions. So let's just, let's wrap up here for today. I want to thank everyone. For attending the event, especially on a busy weekend like this, and with a lot of other stuff going on. It's our hope that you were able to get some information here that you can use and will make a difference. As I mentioned before, we are recording this event, and so we will post it online in a few days once we get everything tied up. I will also post the comments, because there's a lot of good information in the comments or the chat as people were kind of communicating back and forth. And also posts the links to the climate action plans for St. Louis Park and Red Wing, and there's some other cities that have climate action plans, and as we can get links to those, we will post those as well. And three final things. You're going to receive a short evaluation form shortly. Please fill it out. We depend upon these evaluations to improve, our programs or, these events year after year. So it's really important to get your feedback. And as I mentioned, we will try to put together a fall gathering where people can come together to network and share information and ideas. And of course, that will depend upon what the circumstances are like at that point in time. And lastly, please keep yourself safe and healthy, and keep up the good work. So long, everyone. That's it. Have a great day. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, everyone. That was really great.